In a caucus race and a long tail. They were indeed a queer-looking party that assembled on the bank, the birds with draggled feathers, the animals with their fur clinging close to them, and all dripping, wet, cross, and uncomfortable. The first question, of course, was how to get dry again. They had a consultation about this, and after a few minutes, it seems quite natural to Alice to find herself talking familiarly with them. That is a hard word for me, as if she had known them all her life. Indeed, she had quite a long argument with the Lorry, who had last turned sulky and would only say, "I am older than you. You must know better." And this Alice would not allow without knowing how old it was, and as the Lorry positively refused to tell its age, there's no more to be said. At last, the mouse, who seemed to be the person of authority among them, called out, "Sit down, all of you, and listen to me. I'll soon make you dry enough." They all sat down at once in a large ring with the mouse in the middle. Alice, I lost my place. Alice kept her eyes anxiously fixed on it, for she felt sure she would catch a bad cold if she did not get dry very soon. "Ahem," said the mouse with an important air. "Are you all ready? This is the driest thing I know. Silence all around, if you please." William the Conqueror, whose cause was favored by the Pope, was soon submitted to by the English, who wanted leaders and had been of late much accustomed to usurpation and conquest. Edwin and Morcar, the Earls of Mercia and Northumbria. Ugh, said the Lorry with a shiver. "I beg your pardon," said the mouse, frowning, but very politely. "Did you speak?" "Not I," said the Lorry hastily. "I thought you did," said the mouse. "I proceed. Edwin and Morcar, the Earls of Mercia and Northumbria, declared for him, and even Stigand, the patriotic Archbishop of Canterbury, found it advisable." "Found what?" said the duck. "Found it," the mouse replied rather crossly. "Of course you know what it means." "I know what it means well enough when I find a thing," said the duck. "It's generally a frog or a worm. The question is, what did the Archbishop find?" The mouse did not notice the question, but hurriedly went on. "Found it advisable to go with Edgar Atheling to meet William and offer him the crown. William's conduct at first was moderate, but the insolence of his Normans—" "How are you getting on now, my dear?" it continued, turning to Alice as it spoke. "As wet as ever," said Alice in a melancholy tone. "It doesn't seem to dry me at all." "In that case," said the Dodo solemnly, rising to its feet, "I move that the meeting adjourn for the immediate adoption of more energetic remedies." "Speak English," said the eaglet. "I don't know the meaning of half those long words. And what's more, I don't believe you do either." And the eaglet bent down its head to hide a smile. Some of the other birds tittered audibly. "What I was going to say," said the dodo in an offended tone, "was that the best thing to get us dry would be a caucus race." "What is a caucus race?" said Alice. Not that she wanted much to know, but the dodo had paused as if it thought that somebody ought to speak, and no one seemed inclined to say anything. "Why," said the dodo, "the best way to explain it is to do it. And as you might like to try the thing yourself some winter day, I will tell you how the dodo managed it. First, it marked out a race course in a sort of circle. The exact shape didn't matter, it said. And then all the party were placed along the course here and there. There was no 1, 2, 3, and away, but they began running when they liked and left off when they liked, so that it was not easy to know when the race was over. However, when they had been running half an hour or so and were quite dry again, the dodo suddenly called out, "The race is over!" And they crowded round it, panting and asking, "But who has won?" The question the dodo could not answer without a great deal of thought, and it sat for a long time with one pointed finger upon its forehead, the position in which you usually see Shakespeare in the pictures of him. While the rest waited in silence, at last the dodo said, "Everybody has won, and all must have prizes." "But who is to give the prizes?" quite a chorus of voices asked. "Why, she, of course," said the dodo, pointing to Alice with one finger, and the whole party at once crowded around her. calling out in a confusing way, "Prizes! Prizes!" Alice had no idea what to do, and in despair, she put her hand in her pocket and pulled out a box of comfits. Luckily, the saltwater had not got into it, and handed them round as prizes. There was exactly one apiece all round. "But you must have a prize for yourself, you know." "Herself, you know," said the mouse. "Of course," the dodo replied very gravely. "What else have you got in your pocket?" And went on, turning to Alice. "Only a thimble," said Alice sadly. "Hand it over here," said the dodo. Then they all crowded round her once more while the dodo solemnly presented the thimble, saying, "We beg your acceptance of this elegant thimble." And when it had finished this short speech, they all cheered. Alice thought the whole thing was very absurd, but they all looked so grave that she did not dare to laugh. And as she could not think of anything else to say, she simply bowed and took the thimble, looking as solemn as she could. The next thing was to eat the comfits. This caused some noise and confusion, as the large birds complained that they could not taste theirs, and the small ones choked and had to be patted on the back. However, it was over at last, and they sat down again in a ring and begged the mouse to tell them something more. Hydrate, I keep. Okay. Where was I? "You promised to tell me your history, you know," said Alice, "and why it is you hate C&D," she added in a whisper, half afraid that it would be offended again. "Mine is a long and sad tale," said the mouse, turning to Alice and sighing. "It is a long tale, certainly," said Alice, looking down with wonder at the mouse's tail. "But why do you call it sad?" And she kept puzzling about it while the mouse was speaking, so that her idea of the tale was something like, "Fury said to a mouse that he met in a house, 'Let us both go to law. I will prosecute you. Come, I'll take no denial. We must have a trial, for really this morning I've nothing to do.' Said the mouse to the curs, 'Such a trial, dear sir, with no jury or judge, would be wasting our breath.' 'I'll be judge, I'll be jury,' said the cunning O Fury. 'I'll try the whole cause and condemn you to death.'" "You are not attending," said the mouse to Alice severely. "What are you thinking of?" "I beg your pardon," Alice said humbly. "You had gotten to the fifth bin, I think." "I had not," cried the mouse sharply and very angrily. "A not," said Alice, always ready to make herself useful and looking anxiously about her. "Oh, do let me help undo it." "I shall do nothing of the sort," said the mouse, getting up and walking away. "You insult me by talking such nonsense." "I didn't mean it," pleaded poor Alice, "but you're so easily offended, you know." The mouse only growled in reply. "Please come back and finish your story," Alice called after it, and the others all joined in chorus. "Yes, please do." But the mouse only shook its head impatiently and walked a little quicker. "What a pity it wouldn't stay," sighed the Lory. As soon as it was quite out of sight, and an old crab took the opportunity of saying to her daughter, "Ah, my dear, let this be a lesson to you, never lose your temper." "Hold your tongue, Ma," said the young crab, a little snappishly. "You're enough to try the patience of an oyster." "I wish I had Dina here. I know I do," said Alice out loud, addressing nobody in particular. "She'd soon fetch it back." "And who is Dina, if I might venture to ask the question?" said the Lory. Alice replied eagerly, for she was always ready to talk about her pet. "Dina's our cat, and she's such a capital one for catching mice you can't think. And oh, I wish you could have seen her after the birds. Why, she'll eat a little bird as soon as I look at it." As soon as look at it. This speech caused a remarkable sensation amongst the party. Some of the birds hurried off at once. One old magpie began wrapping itself up very carefully. "Oh, Faz, thank you for the 50. Thank you so much. I appreciate that." Okay. Magpie began wrapping itself very carefully, remarking, "I must be getting home. The night air doesn't suit my throat." And a canary called out in a trembling voice to its children, "Come away, my dears. It's high time you are all in bed." Of various pretexts, they all moved off, and Alice was soon left alone. I wish I hadn't mentioned Dina, she said to herself in a melancholy tone. Nobody seems to like her down here, and I'm sure she's the best cat in the world. Oh, my dear Dina, I wonder if I shall ever see you any more. And here poor Alice began to cry again, for she felt very lonely and low-spirited. In a little while, however, she again heard a little pattering of footsteps in the distance, and she looked up eagerly, half hoping that the mouse had changed his mind and was coming back to finish his story. Chapter 4. I think she tricked me? What do you mean? Okay. The rabbit sins in a little bill. It was the right white rabbit trotting slowly back again and looking anxiously about it as it went, as if it had lost something, and she heard it muttering to itself, the Duchess, oh my dear paws, oh my fur and whiskers. She gets, she'll get me executed, as sure as ferrets are ferrets. Where can I have dropped them, I wonder? Alice guessed in a moment that it was looking for the fan and the pair of white kid gloves, and she very good-naturedly began hunting about for them, but they were nowhere to be seen. Everything seems to have changed since her swim in the pool and the great hall, but the glass table and the little door had vanished completely. Very soon the rabbit noticed Alice as she went hunting about and called out to her in an angry tone. Why, Mary Ann, what are you doing here? Run home this moment and fetch me a pair of gloves and a fan. Quick, now! And Alice was so much frightened that she ran off at once in the direction that I pointed to, without trying to explain the mistake it had made. He took me for his housemaid, she said to herself as she ran. How surprised he'll be when he finds out who I am. But I'd better take him and his fan and his gloves, that is, if I can find them. As she said this, she came upon a neat little house, on the door of which was a bright brass plate with the name W. Rabbit engraved upon it. She went in without knocking and hurried upstairs, in great fear lest she should meet the real Marianne and be turned out of the house before she had found the fan and gloves.
Hello there.
Romeo, thank you for the follow. How queer it seems, Alice said to herself, to be going messages for a rabbit. I suppose Dina will be sending me on messages next. And she began fancying the sort of thing that would happen. Miss Alice, come here directly and get ready for your walk. Coming in a minute, nurse. But I've got to see that the mouse doesn't get out. Only I don't think, Alice went on, that they'd let Dina stop in the house if it began ordering people about like that. By this time, she had found her way into a tidy little room with a table in the window, and on it, as she had hoped, a fan and 2 or 3 little tiny white kid gloves. She took up the fan and the pair of white gloves, and was just going to leave the room, when her eye fell upon the little bottle that stood near the looking-glass. There was no label, this time, with the words, "Drink me," but nevertheless she uncorked it and put it to her lips. I know something interesting is going to happen, she said to herself, whenever I eat or drink anything. So I'll just see what this bottle does. I do hope that it'll make me grow large again, for really I am quite tired of being such a tiny little thing. It did so indeed, and much sooner than she had expected. Before she had drunk half the bottle, she found her head pressing against the ceiling, and had to stoop to save her neck from being broken. She hastily put down the bottle, saying to herself, "That's quite enough. I hope I shan't grow any more. As it is, I can't get out at the door. I do wish I hadn't drunk quite as much." Alas, alas, it was too late to wish that. She went on growing, and very soon had to kneel down on the floor. In another minute there was not even room for this, and she tried the effect of laying down with one elbow against the door and the other arm curled around her head. Still she went on growing, and as a last resource she put one arm out of the window and one foot up the chimney, and said to herself, "Now I can do no more. Whatever happens, what will become of me?" Luckily for Alice, the little magic bottle had now had its full effect, and she grew no larger. Still, it was very uncomfortable, and as there seemed to be no sort of chance of her ever getting out of the room again, no wonder she felt unhappy. It was much pleasanter at home, thought poor Alice, when when one wasn't always growing larger and smaller and being ordered about by mice and rabbits. I also I almost wish I hadn't gone down the rabbit hole. And yet, it's rather curious, this sort of life. I do wonder what can have happened to me. When I used to read fairy tales, I fancied the kind of thing never happened. And now here I am in the middle of one. There ought to be a book written about me. That there ought. And when I grow up, I'll write one. But I'm grown up now, she added in a sorrowful tone. At least there's no room to grow up anymore here. But then, thought Alice, shall I never get any older than I am now? That'll be a comfort one way, never to be an old woman. But then always to have lessons to learn. Oh, I shouldn't like that. Oh, you foolish Alice, she answered herself. How can you learn lessons in here? Why, there's hardly enough room for you, and no room for any lesson books. So she went on, taking first one side and then the other, and making quite a conversation of it all together. But after a few minutes, she heard a voice outside and stopped to listen. Marianne, Marianne, said the voice. Fetch me my gloves this moment. Then came a little pattering of feet on the stairs. Alice knew it was the rabbit coming to look for her, and she trembled till she shook the house, quite forgetting that she was now about 1,000 times as large as the rabbit, and had no reason to be afraid of it. Presently, the rabbit came up to the door and tried to open it, but as the door opened inwards, Alice's elbow was pressed hard against it. That attempt proved a failure. Alice heard it say to itself, Then I'll go round and get in the window. That you won't, thought Alice, and after waiting till she fancied she heard the rabbit just under the window, she suddenly spread out her hand and made a snatch in the air. She did not get a hold of anything, but she heard a little shriek and a fall, and a crash of broken glass, from which she concluded that it was just possible it had fallen into a cucumber frame, or something of the sort. Next came an angry voice, the rabbit's. Pat, Pat, where are you? And then a voice she had never heard before. Sure, then I am here, digging for apples, your honor. Digging for apples, indeed, said the rabbit angrily. Here, come and help me out of this. Sounds of more broken glass. Now tell me, Pat, what's that in the window? Sure, it's an arm, your honor. He pronounced it arm. An arm, you goose? Whoever saw one that size? Why, it fills the whole window. Sure it does, your honor. But it's an arm for all that. Well, it got no business there, at any rate. Go and take it away. There was a long silence after this, and Alice could only hear whispers now and then, such as, Sure, I don't like it, your honor, at all. Do as I tell you, you coward. And at last she spread out her hand again and made another snatch in the air. This time there were 2 little shrieks and more sounds of broken glass. What a number of cucumber frames there must be, thought Alice. I wonder what they'll do next. As for pulling me out of the window, I only wish they could. I'm sure I don't want to stay in here any longer. She waited for some time without hearing anything more. At last, a rumbling of little cartwheels and the sound of a good many voices all talking together. She made out the words, Where's the other ladder? Why, I hadn't to bring out one. Bill's got the other. Bill! Fetch it here, lad. Here, put 'em up in this corner. No, tie 'em together first. They don't reach half high enough yet. Oh! They'll do well enough. Don't be particular. Here, Bill, catch hold of this rope. Will the roof bear? Mind the loose slate. Oh, it's coming down. Heads below. Now, who did that? It was Bill, I fancy. Who's to go down the chimney? Nay, I shan't. You do it. That I won't, then. Bill's to go down here. Bill! The master says you're to go down with the chimney. Go down the chimney. Just reading patch notes? Yeah, that's what this is. Some weird patch notes. Oh, so Bill's got to come down the chimney, has he? Said Alice to herself. Shy, they seem to put everything upon Bill. I wouldn't be in Bill's place for a good deal. This fireplace is narrow, to be sure, but I think I can kick it a little. She drew her foot as far down as far down the chimney as she could and waited till she heard a little animal. She couldn't guess what sort it was, scraping and scrambling about in the chimney close above her, then saying to herself, "This is Bill." She gave one sharp kick and waited to see what would happen next. The first thing she heard was a general chorus of, "There goes Bill," then the rabbit's voice along, "Catch him, you by the hedge." Then silence, and then another confusion of voices. "Hold up his head, Prandy now. Don't choke him. How was it, old fellow? What happened to you? Tell us all about it." Last came a little feeble, squeaking voice. "Well, I hardly know. No more. Thank ye, I'm better now. But I'm a deal too flustered to tell you. All I know is something comes at me like a jack-in-a-box, and I goes like a skyrocket." "So you did, old fellow," said the others. "We must burn the house down," said the rabbit's voice, and Alice called out as loud as she could, "If you do, I'll set Dina at you." There was a dead silence instantly, and Alice thought to herself, "I wonder what they will do next. If they had any sense, they'd take the roof off." After a minute or two, they began moving about again, and Alice heard the rabbit say, "A barrowful will do, to begin with. A barrowful." A barrowful of what? Thought Alice. But she had not long to doubt, for the next moment a shower of little petals came rattling in at the window, and some of them hit her in the face. "I'll put a stop to this," she said to herself, and shouted, "You better not do that again," which produced another dead silence. Alice noticed with some surprise that the pebbles were all turning into little cakes as they lay on the floor, and a bright idea came to her head. "If I eat one of these cakes," she thought, "it's sure to make some change in my size, and it can't possibly make me larger. It must make me smaller, I suppose." So she swallowed one of the cakes and was delighted to find that she began shrinking directly. As soon as she was small enough to get through the door, she ran out of the house and found quite a crowd of little animals and birds waiting outside. That poor lizard, Bill, was in the middle, being held up by 2 guinea pigs who were giving it something out of a bottle. They all made a rush at Alice the moment she appeared, but she ran off as hard as she could and found herself safe in a thick wood. "The first thing I've got to do," said Alice to herself, as she wandered about in the wood, "is to grow to my right size again, and the second thing is to find my way to that lovely garden. I think that will be the best plan." It sounded like an excellent plan, no doubt, and very neatly and simply arranged. The only difficulty was that she had not the smallest idea how to set about it, and while she was peering about anxiously amongst the trees, a little sharp bark just over her head made her look up in a great hurry. An enormous puppy was looking down at her with large round eyes and feebly stretching out at one paw to trying to touch her. "Poor little thing," said Alice in a coaxing tone, and she tried hard to whistle to it. But she was terribly frightened all the time at the thought that it might be hungry, in which case it would very likely eat her up in spite of all her coaxing. Hardly knowing what she did, she picked up a little bit of a stick and held it out to the puppy, whereupon the puppy jumped into the air off all its feet at once with a yelp of delight and rushed at the stick and made believe to worry it. Then Alice dodged behind a great thistle to keep herself from being run over, and the moment she appeared on the other side, the puppy made a rush at the stick and tumbled head over heels in its hurry to get a hold of it. Then Alice, thinking it was very like having a game of play with a cart horse, and expecting every moment to be trampled under its feet, ran round the thistle again, and the puppy began a series of short charges at the stick, running a very little way forwards each time and a long way back, and barking hoarsely at all the while, till at last it sat down a good way off, panting, with its tongue hanging out from its mouth, and its great eyes half shut. "And yet, what a dear little puppy it was," said Alice, as she leant against a buttercup to rest herself and fanned herself with one of the leaves. "I should have liked teaching it tricks very much. If I'd only been the right size to do it. Oh dear, I'd nearly forgotten that I've got to grow up again. Let me see, how is it to be managed? I suppose I ought to eat or drink something or other, but the great question is, what?" The great question certainly was what. Alice looked all round at the flowers and the blades of grass, but she did not see anything that looked like the right thing to eat or drink under the circumstances. There was a large mushroom growing near her, about the same height as herself, and when she had looked under it and both sides of it and behind it, it occurred to her that she might as well look and see what was on the top of it. She stretched herself up on tiptoe and peeked over the edge of the mushroom. Her eyes immediately met those of a large blue caterpillar that was sitting on the top with its arms folded, quietly smoking a long hookah, and taking not the smallest notice of her or anything else. Nice stretch. Good afternoon, Marcus. Hi, guys. I could see you doing this for a living. I just need practice. No freaking way you're doing this. Uh-huh. Indeed. How's it sound so far? I can't listen to myself. Hello, guys who got in while I was reading. How are you doing? I hope you're doing well. You're a bastard. Thank you, I like it. Let me scare the comfy ones. Just watching football. Nice. American football or soccer football? Wish I could dim this light. This web page. Thank you. Cool. Good to know. Okay. Chapter 5. This is probably going to be the last chapter. I'm going to try to get through this and then move along. Chapter 5. Advice from a Caterpillar. The caterpillar and Alice looked at each other for some time in silence. At last the caterpillar took the hookah out of its mouth and addressed her in a languid, sleepy voice. "Who are you?" said the caterpillar. This was not an encouraging opening for a conversation, Alice replied. Rather shyly, I hardly know, sir. Just at present, at least, I know who I was when I got up this morning. But I think I must have changed several times since then. What do you mean by that? Said the caterpillar sternly. Explain yourself. I can't explain myself, I'm afraid, sir, said Alice, because I'm not myself, you see. I don't see, said the caterpillar. I'm afraid I can't put it more clearly, Alice replied very politely, for I can't understand it myself to begin with, and being so many different sizes in a day is very confusing. It isn't, said the caterpillar. Well, perhaps you haven't found it so yet, said Alice, but when you have to turn into a chrysalis, you will someday, you know, and then after that into a butterfly. I should think you feel it a little queer, won't you? Not a bit, said the caterpillar. Well, perhaps your feelings may be different, said Alice. All I know is, it would feel very queer to me. You, said the caterpillar contemptuously. Who are you? Which brought them back again to the beginning of the conversation. Alice felt a little irritated at the caterpillars making such very short remarks, and she drew herself up and said very gravely, I think you ought to tell me who you are first. Why? Said the caterpillar. Here was another puzzling question, and as Alice could not think of any good reason, and as the caterpillar seemed to be in a very unpleasant state of mind, she turned away. Come back, the caterpillar called after her. I've something important to say. This sounded promising, certainly. Alice turned and came back again. Keep your temper, said the caterpillar. Is that all? Said Alice, swallowing down her anger as well as she could. No, said the caterpillar. Alice thought she might as well wait, as she had nothing else to do, and perhaps, after all, it might tell her something worth hearing. For some minutes it puffed away without speaking, but at last unfolded its arms, took the hookah out of its mouth again, and said, So you think you're really changed, do you? I'm afraid I am, sir, said Alice. I can't remember the things as I used. And I don't keep the same size for 10 minutes together. Can't remember what things, said the caterpillar. Well, I've tried to say, how doth the little busy bee, but it all came different, Alice replied in a very melancholy voice. Repeat. You are old, Father William, said the caterpillar. Alice folded her hands and began. You are old, Father William, the young man said, and your hair has become very white, and yet you incessantly stand on your head. Do you think at your age it is right? In my youth, Father William replied to his son, I feared it might injure the brain. But now that I am perfectly sure I have none, why, I do it again and again. Again and again. You are old, said the youth, as I mentioned before, and I have grown mostly uncommonly fat. Yet you turned a back somersault at the door. Pray, what is the reason of that? In my youth, said the sage, as he shook his gray locks, I kept all my limbs very supple by the use of this ointment, 1 shilling the box. Allow me to sell you a couple. You are old, said the youth, and your jaws are too weak for anything tougher than suet. Yet you finished the goose with the bones and the beak. Pray, how did you manage to do it? In my youth, said the father, I took to the law and argued each case with my wife. And the muscular strength which it gave to my jaw has lasted the rest of my life. You are old, said the youth. One would hardly suppose that your eye was steady as ever. Yet you balanced an eel on the end of your nose. What made you so awfully clever? I have answered 3 questions, and that is enough, said his father. Don't give yourself airs. Do you think I can listen all day to such stuff? Be off, or I'll kick you down the stairs. That is not quite right, said the caterpillar. Not quite right, I'm afraid, said Alice timidly. Some of the words have got all altered. It is wrong from beginning to end, said the caterpillar decidedly, and there was silence for some minutes. The caterpillar was the first to speak. What size do you want to be? It asked. Oh, I'm not particular as to size, Alice hastily replied. Only one doesn't like changing so often, you know? I don't know, said the caterpillar. Alice said nothing. She had never been so contradicted in her life before, and she felt that she was losing her temper. Are you content now? Said the caterpillar. Well, I should like to be a little bit larger, sir, if you wouldn't mind, said Alice. 3 inches is such a wretched height to be. Sounds like plenty enough to me. It is a very good height indeed, said the caterpillar angrily, rearing itself up as it spoke. It was exactly 3 inches high. But I'm not used to it, pleaded poor Alice in a piteous tone. And she thought of herself, I wish the creatures wouldn't be so easily offended. You'll get used to it in time, said the caterpillar, and it put the hookah into its mouth and began smoking again. This time Alice waited patiently until it chose to speak again. In a minute or two, the caterpillar took the hookah out of its mouth and yawned once or twice and shook itself. Then it got down off the mushroom and crawled away in the grass, merely remarking as it went, One side will make you grow taller, and the other side will make you grow shorter. One side of what? The other side of what? Thought Alice to herself. Of the mushroom, said the caterpillar, just as if she had asked out loud. In another moment, it was out of sight. Alice remained looking thoughtfully at the mushroom for a minute, trying to make out which were the 2 sides of it, as it were perfectly round. She found this a very difficult question. However, at last she stretched her arms round it as far as they would go, and broke a bit off the edge with each hand. And now, which is which? She said to herself, and nibbled a little of the right hand bit to try the effect. The next moment she felt a violent blow underneath her chin. It had struck her foot. She was a good deal frightened by this very sudden change, but she felt that there was no time to be lost, as she was shrinking rapidly. So she set to work at once to eat some of the other bit. Her chin was pressed so closely to her foot that there was hardly room to open her mouth, but she did it at last and managed to swallow a morsel of the left-hand bit. Riorgeous thing to follow. Come, my head's free at last, said Alice in a tone of delight. which changed into alarm another moment, where she found that her shoulders were nowhere to be found, as she could see when she looked down with an immense length of neck, which seemed to rise like a stalk out of a sea of green leaves that lay far below her. What can all that green stuff be? Said Alice. And where have my shoulders got to? And oh, my poor hands! How is it I can't see you? She was moving about them as she spoke, but no result seemed to follow, except a little shaking amongst the distant green leaves. As there seemed to be no chance of getting her hands up to her head, she tried to get her head down to them, and was delighted to find that her neck would bend about as easily in any direction, like a serpent. She had succeeded in curving it down into a graceful zigzag, and was going to dive in among the leaves, which she had found to be nothing but the tops of the trees under which she had been wandering, which, with a sharp hiss, made her draw back in a hurry. A large pigeon had flown into her face and was beating her violently with its wings. "Serpent!" screamed the pigeon. "I am not a serpent," said Alice indignantly. "Leave me alone." "Serpent, I say again," repeated the pigeon, but in a more subdued tone, and added with a kind of a sob, "I've tried every way, and nothing seems to suit them." "I haven't the least idea what you're talking about," said Alice. "I've tried the roots of trees, I've tried the banks, and I've tried hedges," the pigeon went on without attending to her, "but those serpents, there's no pleasing them." Alice was more and more puzzled, but as she thought there was no use in saying anything more until the pigeon has finished. "As if it wasn't trouble enough hatching these eggs," said the pigeon, "but I must be on the lookout for serpents night and day. Why, I haven't had a wink of sleep these 3 weeks." "I'm very sorry you've been annoyed," said Alice, who was beginning to see its meaning. "And just as I'd taken the highest tree in the wood," continued the pigeon, raising its voice to a shriek, "and just as I was thinking I should be free of them at last, they must needs come wriggling down from the sky. A serpent." "But I'm not a serpent, I tell you," said Alice. I'm a... "Well, what are you?" said the pigeon. "I can see you're trying to invent something." I'm a little girl," said Alice, rather doubtfully, as she remembered the number of changes she had gone throughout the day. "A likely story indeed," said the pigeon, in a tone of the deepest contempt. "My God, Grove!" Jesus Christ! Where was I? "A likely story indeed," said the pigeon in a tone of deepest content. "I'd seen a good many girls in my time, but never one with such a neck as that. No, you're a serpent, and there's no use denying it. I suppose you'll be telling me next that you've never tasted an egg." "I have tasted eggs, certainly," said Alice, who was a very truthful child. "But little girls eat eggs quite as much as serpents do, you know." "I don't believe it," said the pigeon. "But if they do, why, then they're a kind of serpent. That's all I can say." This was such a new idea to Alice that she was quite silent for a minute or two, which gave the pigeon opportunity of asking, "You're looking for eggs. I know that well enough. And what does it matter to me whether you're a little girl or a serpent?" My God, like... "Thank you, you bastards." "It matters a good deal to me," said Alice hastily, "but I'm not looking for eggs, as it happens, and if I was, I shouldn't want yours. I don't like them raw." "Well, be off then," said the pigeon in a sulky tone. As it settled down again into its nest, Alice crouched down amongst the trees as well as she could, for her neck kept getting entangled amongst the branches, and every now and then she had to stop and untwist it. After a while, she remembered that she still held the pieces of mushrooms in her hands and set to work very carefully, nibbling first at one and then the other, and growing sometimes smaller and sometimes shorter, until she had succeeded in bringing herself down to her usual height. It was so long since she had been anything near the right size. that it felt quite strange at first. But she got used to it after a few minutes and began talking to herself as usual. Come, there's half my plan done now. How puzzling all these changes are. I'm never sure what I'm going to be from one minute to another. However, I've got to my right size. The next thing is to get to the beautiful garden. How is that to be done, I wonder? As she said this, she came suddenly upon an open place with a little house in it, about 4 feet high. Whoever lives here, thought Alice, it'll never do to come upon them at this size. Why, it should frighten them out of their wits. So she began nibbling at the right-hand bit again and did not venture to go near the house, though she had brought herself down to 9 inches high. Thank you, Grove. All right. Thank you, guys.